Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2474 under Committee Report number 161. This is the bill on the PNP Forensic DNA Database. So moved, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, the resumption of consideration of Senate Bill number 2474 under Committee Report number 161 is now in order.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of this bill is that we have sponsored the measure. With that, I move to open the period of interpellation and recognize the sponsor, Senator Ronald Bato Dela Rosa, and to interpellate our minority leader, Senator Aquilino Cocopintem.
Senators Bato Dela Rosa and Bongo are recognized.
Bong? Is it Bong?
The minority leader.
May I be recognized?
I'm sorry,
Mr. President? Yes.
the minority leader is recognized.
Yes.
Kala ko si...
Okay, Senator Bongo is here. I'm willing to give way, Mr. President, for this interpellation.
All right, Senator Bongo is recognized.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the gentleman, sponsor, and former GPNP yield for some few questions?
Yes, Mr. President, Your Honor.
First of all, Mr. President, bakit nung GPNP ka, hindi mo to pinropose?
Magkakasama kayo.
Mr. President, maybe na-busy kami ng husto no, Mr. President. Hindi ko ito natutukan talaga ng bigyan ng tamang pansin at that time. I must admit. But right now, since na-equip na yung ating mga meron na tayong tatlong lugar sa Pilipinas, Krame, Cebu, and Davao, binigyan tayo, nagkakaroon tayo ng ganitong capability. So, naramdaman ng ating mga taga-PNP forensic group na kailangan talaga ng legislation. Habang tumatagal kasi, na-feel nila yung the need for a legislation.
Mr. President, alam niyo naman po na during the time of former President Duterte, even during your time as Chief of Police ka pa ng Davao, o sa Davao Region, full support tayo sa ating kapulisan. And in fact, alam mo yun, noong 2018, pinaglaban natin na dito sa tulong ng mga kasama natin sa Kongreso, na doble po ang sahod ng uniform personnel, PNP, at full support tayo sa police dahil hindi nila magagampanan ang kanilang trabaho at hindi magiging successful na labanan ng kriminalidad, hindi po suportahan. Kailangan talaga ng police ng suporta. Tama, Mr. President?
Yes, tama, Mr. President. It just so happened talaga that at the early stages of the establishment of our DNA laboratories, hindi pa na-realize ng mga people from the forensics group the need of this legislation. So ngayon lang nakita nila, habang tumatagal, nakita na kailangan ng support itong kanilang opisina to empower their office through legislation. Kaya nga, kasi ngayon, at the moment, Mr. President, pag meron kang nahuli, then gusto mong kukunan siya ng DNA sample para magkakaroon ka ng database sa kanya, yung kanyang profile, mailagay sa database, hindi mo siya basta-bastang makunan if without his consent. Pero with this legislation, magkakaroon na tayo ng mandatory na pagkukuha ng sample sa mga Section 9, mandatory collection of DNA sample. The following shall be required to provide biological sample. A, those convicted by final judgment for violation of any criminal law. B, those persons who have a pending criminal case before any court of competent jurisdiction. C, those who are legally detained under the law. D, those ordered by a judicial or quasi-judicial order to submit their DNA sample in relation to a pending case. E, active members of law enforcement agencies. And F, active members of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. So ito po yung kinakailangan talaga na Mr. President,
Mr. President,
na provision para magkakaroon ng database na marami.
Gusto lang natin marinig at marinig na mga kababayan natin what is the rationale behind this measure, paano ito makakatulong kumpara po nung unang panahon, no? Updated na tayo ngayon. Halimbawa, 10 years ago, sa ngayon, ano na pong pinagbago at anong magiging tulong nito sa ating PNP kung institutionalize po natin ito, since sabi mo nga meron na tayong forensic database sa PNP ngayon.
Yes, yes.
Tama, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Gusto niyo pong isabatas ito, institutionalize po ito. So ano hong pinaka simple lang po na explanation na makakatulong po ito sa ating kapulisan at sa ating crime solving po, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President, DNA is a game changer as far as crime prevention and crime solution is concerned. We have the following objectives of the database. The objective of the DNA database is to establish, keep, and maintain comprehensive national DNA database in order to perform comparative searches for the following purposes. Number one, serves as a tool for crime prevention and crime solution. Normal, Mr. President, kapag ikaw kriminal ka, alam mo na meron ka ng profile na nasa database, takot ka na ngayon na gumawa ng krimen dahil any DNA sample that can be collected from the crime scene can be matched doon sa yung available na database. And also, for crime solution, mapapadali ang pag-identify ng perpetrators of the crime. Then, number two, identify persons who might have been involved in the commission of an offense. Yun nga, through gathering of DNA samples from the crime scene and doon sa body of the crime, matutulungan natin na ma-identify yung mga perpetrators.
Tapos, Mr. President, ito bang magiging resulta sa DNA testing ninyo? Is it magiging conclusive or admissible in court?
Yes, Mr. President. Very conclusive po ito. And admissible in
How
court.
accurate po ito, Mr. President?
99.999999%, Mr. President. Except, lahat kasi ng tao, there are no two persons who have the same DNA profile except for twins. Identical twins.
Pag twins, pareho.
Pag twins, pareho sila ng DNA.
Pareho talaga yun.
Pareho sila. Pero
So,
all others, walang magkapareho.
Paano yun pag yung kambal ang may kagagawan? Paano yun
Siguro, dagdagan natin ng another, diskarte na ng investigador, Mr. President, kung paano, kung dalawang kambal ay nagiging persons of interest sa isang krimen.
Pareho daw. Pareho raw, Mr. President.
Ito ang sagot, Mr. President. Kung meron ba tayong, if there is other technology to identify the difference of identical twins in terms of DNA, the answer is yes, using the next generation sequencing. NGS, Mr. President, is a state-of-the-art sequencing technology that offers ultra-high output, scalability, and speed. So, may bagong technology ngayon, Mr. President.
Wala ho bang ganitong kapasidad ang ating other law enforcement agencies like the NBI? Meron sila.
Ang NBI, meron din silang DNA capability.
Aside from NBI and sa PNP, ano ho bang...
Aside from NBI, tayo na lang sa PNP. Tayo lang may database. So, PNP lang pala ang merong database. Ang NBI, meron silang capability, pero wala silang database.
Meron silang capability.
Pero wala silang database.
Anong pinagkaiba nun?
Pwede silang magkuha ng sample, pwede silang mag-analyze ng sample at makaproduce sila ng DNA profile, pero wala silang database. Unlike sa PNP, kaya nating magkuha ng sample, mag-analyze ng sample,
Yes, may database.
magkakuha ng profile at meron tayong database as of now.
Yun lang.
Ang kagandahan kasi sa police, Mr. President, dahil yun nga, lahat ng lugar mayroong police station. Lahat ng munisipyo mayroong police station. At hindi tayo mahirapan pagdating sa database dahil lahat ng krimen na nangyari doon sa EOR ng isang munisipyo ay talaga isasubmit nila yan doon sa forensics group for kung mayroong makolekt na DNA sample doon sa crime scene.
For example, no, yung mga, sabi mo nga, may mga police station na madali yung access nila. Padala ka agad yung, kailangan merong mga internet ito.
Physical talaga, Mr. President, yung
I mean, yung kung meron ka ipapa-verify dun sa result. How about yung mga police stations na malalayo? Ano bang opisina ang dapat dadaanan nito sa True Region?
Mr. President, kailangan talaga itong ang comparative analysis ay doon talaga gagawin sa laboratory, DNA laboratory. Kung gusto natin mag-match ng samples.
I mean, pag meron na yung resulta, paano niyo i-verify? Papadala pa sa krame?
Hindi na, Mr. President. Sa Mindanao, meron tayo sa Davao City, sa Cebu, sa Visayas, meron tayong sa Cebu na DNA laboratory. At dito sa Luzon, meron tayo sa Krami.
Under anong division po ito ng Philippine National Police?
Forensics group, Mr. President. Yung dating crime lab,
Yung
if you
SOCO.
can remember, yung SOCO. Part lang yung SOCO sa crime lab. So, yung
Crime lab, anong tawag ngayon? Di ba crime lab yun dati? Merong regional crime lab.
Yes. Ngayon, ang crime lab pinalitan ng pangalan, ni-rename as Forensics Group. Ang Forensics Group, merong Forensics Group 11 for Region 11, Forensic Group for Region 7 para sa Cebu. So, yun lang, pinalitan lang ng pangalan, Mr. President.
Ito yung crime lab noon.
Crime lab dati.
Forensics Group. So, magiging under po siya ng Forensics Group ang mga prosesong dadaan dito.
Yes, correct, Mr. President.
So, halimbawa, may krimen dito nangyari. So, papasok ngayon yung
SOCO.
SOCO.
Yeah, to collect pieces of evidence dito sa loob. Then, dadalhin nila doon sa krami, sa forensics group, doon sa crime, yung DNA laboratory for processing.
For example, no, merong nangyaring krimen dyan, tapos wala yung witness. Wala pang witness, di ba? Andyan na patay yung isang tao, sinaksak. So, anong gagawin ng SOCO o ng forensics group? Yung standard operating procedure ninyo at paano makakatulong itong DNA ninyo para mas mapabilis at maging conclusive yung ebidensya dito.
Yes, Mr. President. Ganito po yun.
Para maintindihan po ng publiko.
Pag may nangyaring krimen dito sa loob, halimbawa sa loob ng session hall, automatic yan. Ipapa-cordon off itong area para hindi makontaminate yung crime scene.
Yun yung makita nila na yellow.
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 Police line, do not cross. Police line.
Yan.
So, ma-sealed na yung area, sealed off. Then, papasok na ngayon yung mga scene of the crime operatives, yung taga-SOCO, para maghanap ng ebidensya. Halimbawa, merong naiwan dyan na mga cigarette butts na o kaya buhok na hindi belonging to the victim.
So, yung buhok,
Buhok.
nila.
O ipipick upin nila yan dadalhin doon sa DNA laboratory. At,
So ano pwede maging ebidensya sa DNA? Buhok? Ano pa?
buhok, saliva, ihi, dugo, urine, blood, perspiration, pawis, yung parts of the skin, nails.
So anong gagamitin ng forensics group para i-secure yung mga buhok? Minsan maliliit na yon. Laway, paano mo
Meron sa technical capability yan, Mr. President, kung may cotton swab, kung sa laway, cotton swab ang gagamitin, pati sa dugo.
So Mr. President, kumpara noong 10 years, mas high-tech na ngayon, Mr. President.
High-tech talaga, Mr. President.
Mas iba na, mas ano na yung kapasidad natin, mas nagiging modern at magiging conclusive na ito kaagad yung may ebidensya, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. As I've said,
So ang gusto nyo is isabatas ito, institutionalize ito para maging part na siya ng budget ng Philippine National Police.
correct, Mr. President.
Kung nakakatulong naman sa crime solution natin, crime solving, Mr. President, supportahan natin ito.
Thank you, Mr.
Malaking bagay yun, napaka-importante. Yan ang po ang trabaho ng police to maintain peace and order and crime solving, Mr. President. Yun lang po, Mr. President. Baka may gusto ka pang i-explain sa publiko para maintindihan po nila kung bakit napakahalaga po nitong inyong batas sa DNA pag-institutionalize dito sa DNA forensic.
Mr. President, gusto ko lang idagdag na ang gamit po, the uses of the DNA in forensic investigation is that DNA is used to identify a certain individual. DNA evidence is used to link perpetrators to crime scene, to exonerate individuals who were wrongly accused or convicted. So kahit na na-convict ka na, Mr. President, at later on, ma-find out through DNA analysis na iba pala yung hindi pala ikaw ang gumawa ng krimen, pwedeng ma-exonerate yung victim. And also, it can
Pwede
establish...
siya ma-absuelto dahil negative sa DNA.
Pwede, Mr. President. Pagtakbo na yan ng kaso.
Dahil dito sa pagiging
yung wrongly arrested person ay pwede pa rin siya makalusot dahil nga through DNA. Nakakatulong ito in both ways to pin down the real culprits and to free the wrongly accused suspects. And also, Mr. President, ito ay nakakatulong for paternity testing para malaman kung sino ang tatay ng isang bata. And also, in missing persons investigation, yung mga mass disasters, disaster victim identification, malaking tulong po ito, Mr. President.
So ang importante rito yung so under na po siya ng regional forensics group na po as a PNP. Ito.
Yes, Mr. President.
Tapos yung SOCO, sila yung pupunta sa
Crime scene.
Crime scene. Yung ano ho bang mga doktor ho ba yung dapat dito, Mr. President? Yung mga police, di ba may mga police doctor tayo ngayon?
Marami tayong doktor na police, pero karamihan dito is mga medtech at mga chemist ang involved sa...
Anong highest ranking na police ngayon sa... Yung nagdadala ng forensics group, Mr. President? Since meron siya mga regional offices, yung sa Krame, anong pinaka-highest ranking?
As Police Brigadier General, Mr. President.
Sino po ang... kayo po, sir?
The whole forensic.
Doktor po kayo, sir?
Hindi po, sir. Accountant ako, sir.
Sige, sir.
One stock, ha?
Yes, sir.
Kabalier ka rin, sir?
Hindi, sir.
Basta,
PNP, sir.
PNP.
Salamat. Anong class mo, sir?
93, sir.
93.
93. So, one-star general. Yun lang po, Mr. President. Full support naman tayo basta sa police ever since kapakanan ng police and capability to enhance the capability of our Philippine National Police, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Maraming salamat, Majority Leader. Ikaw, sige. Yeah.
Thank you, Senators. Senator Go.
Mr. President, Minority Leader, seeking the floor.
Minority Leader is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, kung kaya nyo pa, di tuloy pa natin to, Mr. President, kasi
Yeah.
we want to take advantage of the fact that the resource persons are here.
Yeah,
Sayang.
yes.
Do we have a foreigner guest? Is the FBI here?
Yeah.
Wala.
Resource person. Resource person, Mr. President.
From the FBI?
No.
Okay.
Expert lang siya, expert from DNA. For DNA.
Okay. So may we identify our foreign resource person for the record, Mr. President?
He is Mr. Mr. Saura Maria, the Director of Asia GTH DNA.
Sige po.
Mr. President.
Sige po, Mr. President. So, ang purpose po ng ating panukalang batas is to is what, Mr. President? To establish a PNP DNA database?
Yes, Mr. President, to institutionalize the establishment of the PNP database.
Pero akala ko we already have.
We already have, Mr. President, and we just through this legislation, we hope to empower the PNP to develop the forensic DNA database.
And what do they have now? Forensic DNA database din.
Yes, Mr. President.
What was the legal basis for them to compile this database?
Legal basis.
It's part of crime solution.
Yeah, right now, Mr. President, even though they are accused, still, ang ginagamit nilang sistema para magkakuha sila ng database is through voluntarism, Mr. President. Kahit na accuse siya, yung isang tao, kinakausap, kung willing ka ba magbigay ng sample, then kinukuha. At ang marami ngayon, coming from PNP personnel and AFP requirement. Okay.
So the critical equipment po nito ay
Ano yung machine?
mga magkano po yung nito, yung critical equipment, yung ano bang tawag mo dyan? What is the name of, or how do we call the machine which gives us the DNA results, Mr. President?
Mr. President, sa kabuuan, ito ay aabot ng around 800 million yung nakasit up ngayon. Presently, nakasit up sa Krami, sa Cebu, at sa Davao. All in all, 800,000, Mr. President.
Okay, so the PNP already has for a DNA database, and they have already decentralized the location of the machines which can give us the DNA profile in 3 areas. One is in Camp Crame, siguro yung isa?
Yes, Mr.
And then
President.
one is in PNP
Cebu.
camp or station in Cebu, and one is in the PNP camp or station in Davao City.
Yes, Mr.
And
President.
this cost us 800 million. So
Yes, Mr. President.
the collection of the DNA sample can be done at any police station.
Yes, Mr. President, whenever, if it involves a crime scene, Mr. President, kung saan
Okay.
yung area, doon tayo makakolekta ng DNA samples. Pero yung magbo-volunteer, they can report to police stations at dadalhin sila doon sa forensics group. Yung in 3 different places, Mr. President, as you have mentioned, one in Davao, one in Cebu, and one in Camp Crame.
Hindi, for example, a policeman kasi ang active PNP personnel, sa panukala natin, kailangan mag-submit, di ba? Kailangan mag-submit, mandatory mag-submit.
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay. So someone, the personnel, the PNP personnel is in Cagayan de Oro.
Well, the forensics people from Davao can go to Cagayan de Oro. That is the closest laboratory, Mr. President. They can go to, from Davao, they can travel to Cagayan de Oro to collect samples from the policemen in Cagayan de Oro.
So there will be a systematic way.
Yes, Mr. President.
For the ang problema ko kasi, Mr. President, yung handling natin ngayon ng sample, thousands of samples ang kukolektahin, and then of course there will be a schedule for the PNP personnel in Tawi-Tawi and the AFP personnel in Sulu. So thousands of samples ngayon yan. Is the PNP, or doesn't the PNP have some issues on the handling of samples? Hindi ba nagagamit din sa atin yan sa yung chain of custody sa drug cases, Mr. President? And sometimes the failure to observe the chain of custody leads to acquittal in drug cases. So doon ako yung worry ko lang is baka yung DNA sample ni Mr. A ay now ma-record as DNA sample ni Mr. B, Mr. President.
Right now, Mr. President, we have trained personnel, Mr. President, who are technically proficient in the collection and the preservation of samples, Mr. President, and I am informed that there is no issue so far. There is no issue so far as the collection, or maybe the possible violation of that chain of custody of evidence, Mr. President.
Has the sponsor encountered the Dror and Hampikian study in 2011, where the researchers found that the DNA interpretation varied significantly among lab technicians and forensic experts? The researchers sent the exact same DNA mixtures to 17 different experts to find out what their conclusions would be. And then ang nangyari, the 17 forensic experts or scientists arrived at remarkably different results. Siguro very far from the 99.9999% accuracy mentioned earlier by our sponsor. So is this a well-known or famous study, the Dror and Hampikian study, Mr. President?
This study mixtures of many samples.
Yeah, Mr. President, accordingly, this study is a mixture of different samples. It's quite tricky. It's quite tricky, Mr. President.
Technology is getting better.
But right now, the technology is getting better. The technology is getting better.
Diba, what is the present state of technology? What is the claimed accuracy, Mr. President?
It depends on the mixtures. It's very difficult, but sometimes it can be, from 80%. Depends on the mixture. It's mixture of samples, like different semen samples, different criminals.
Okay.
Their samples.
It depends in the mixture of the samples, Mr. President. But according to our resource person here, the lowest is about 80%. That's the lowest accuracy rate. And it can go up as far as 99.9%.
Hindi ko maintindihan, Mr. President, yung mix.
Depends on the mixture.
What is the mixture of the sample? Di ba one sample lang yan from one person, Mr. President?
In a rape case, for example, if it's a gang rape, then you will have
Quality? Does the mixture mean quality?
Mr. President, an example being cited here is a case of gang rape. So gang rape, if you examine the vagina of the victim,
Yeah.
you can get multiple semen.
Yeah.
So the accuracy now is somehow not really compromised, but somehow being lowered, the accuracy, because multiple semens coming from multiple sources, because it's gang rape. So the accuracy is has lowered, Mr. President.
So the current machines of the PNP, how modern are these?
How modern? You have a very modern system, equipment, Mr. President, and the system is being provided by the FBI. It's quite up to the state-of-the-art system.
Donated to us by the FBI?
Yes, Mr. President. The system is donated by the FBI.
No, this system worth 800 million pesos?
No, that's not the system. The machine. The machine. Laboratory machines worth 800,000. But the
800
system,
million,
800 million. But the system being used is donated by FBI. The hardware and the software, Mr. President. The hardware is 800 million pesos, but the software is free, provided by the FBI.
And then itong combination ng hardware and software that we have can yield na what percentage of accuracy if the sample comes from a mouth swab of one person?
If it's one person only, there's no mixture.
Yes.
99.9999%, Mr. President.
Para pala itong PCOS machine, Mr. President. I have encountered that accuracy also claimed in the PCOS machine.
Because according to Mr. President, there's no whole number when we talk about probability.
Yes.
So it's always 0.9999.
So database ito, so mga convicts will be required to, no? Required.
Yes, Mr. President.
Require it, no?
Convict.
And then it's not blood sample, no? I'm worried kasi if we require people to give a blood sample, some might object because how is the sample to be collected?
Buccal swab, Mr. President.
Buccal swab.
So saliva.
Okay.
That's
not so anong tawag mo doon yung invasive. Yeah,
that's so invasive, yeah.
Yes.
Only buccal
Mouth swab.
Mouth swab.
Oh.
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay, so those convicted by final judgment, persons with pending criminal case, persons legally detained under the law, persons ordered by judicial or quasi-judicial bodies to submit in relation to a pending case, active members of law enforcement agencies and active members of the AFP.
Yes, Mr.
So,
President.
yung pang-apat po, yung persons ordered by quasi-judicial or judicial order in relation to a pending case, that pending case must be a criminal case?
Not necessarily, Mr. President. It can be civil case, Mr. President. A sample case is a paternity. Question of paternity. It's a civil case.
So looks like, okay, so at least makita natin na walang label dito na you will, because you are required to submit your DNA sample because it's related to a possible crime that you committed. So hindi ganun kasi nga maganda rito, sinama natin ng all active members of law enforcement
Correct, Mr.
agencies.
Yes.
And then active members of the AFP.
Yes.
Okay.
Also, volunteer persons, Mr. President, like, for example, pilots, they feel that anytime accident may happen during a plane crash, all the bodies, victims of the bodies were burned beyond recognition. So, for future reference, they can volunteer themselves to submit for some DNA sample collection.
Yes,
Mr. President.
pero yung in-enumerate po natin yung required.
Yung required lang.
Required po.
Yeah,
So,
required lang.
when we say active members of the law enforcement agencies, may we name what are these law enforcement agencies? Para alam nila kung member pala sila doon, they will be required to submit their DNAs. PNP,
PNP, Mr. President. NBI.
BI,
Coast Guard.
Coast Guard,
Coast Guard. PDEA.
PDEA,
Bureau of Fire.
BFP,
BGMP, Mr. President.
GMP,
Bureau of Correction.
Bucor,
Ano pa ba?
NAMRIA.
NAMRIA?
NAMRIA, hindi ba? Kasi,
They're uniform
Kaya nga,
personnel,
should
Mr.
be-
President, but they're not
should
law
we
enforcement.
Should we use that? Should we use that? Kasi yun ang normal grouping nila eh. So law enforcement and uniformed personnel? Is that,
We
is
can
that-
say, because in the case of NAMRIA, they're not law enforcement.
Yes, but they uniform.
They are uniform.
Kasi yun ang usual
Yeah.
phraseology natin, yun ang
Yeah.
grouping natin eh.
NBI is not uniform,
Yes,
but they are law enforcement.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Can we join the two concepts together? At
Yeah, I think
na
so,
lang
Mr.
natin?
President.
Yeah, kasi
Yeah.
pero ito lang kasi importante kasi na pwede naman sila mag-volunteer pero required dito eh.
Yes, Mr.
apo.
President.
So maganda din po siguro ito kasi yung active members of the PNP.
Yes.
Nasa database na kayo.
Yes.
Yung deterrent effect, Mr.
Yes,
President.
Mr. President. Very much deterrent factor.
So yung ating mga, kung may crime scene tayo, we have this SOCO ba? Is that
SOCO.
SOCO, di ba? The
Yes.
SOCO is the unit to examine the crime scene.
Yes,
Automatic ba yung search nila for some items or items which could be possible source of DNA? Ano ba? Automatic ba yun?
Automatic, Mr. President. Everything that can be found in the crime scene that may be of value, maybe of evidentiary value will be collected by the SOCO operatives, Mr. President.
Tapos pag may DNA database na, it something generates a DNA profile, must search po natin.
Yes, Mr. President.
So that's the value of this measure, Mr. President. Nung discussion po natin sa PNP reorganization bill, ito po bang unit na ito ay already in the organizational chart of the PNP?
Yes, Mr. President.
What is it called? Kasi may mga different offices ang tawag natin.
It's already called Forensics Group, Mr. President.
Forensics.
Forensics Group na. Before it was called the Crime Laboratory Group. Now it's already Forensic Group. So yung pinasa natin na naka-third reading natin, yung submitted to Malacanang, enrolled bill to Malacanang, ay Forensics Group na ang nakalagay doon, Mr. President.
Okay, wala po tayong binabago sa placement of this forensic group sa organizational chart ng PNP at wala tayong binabago sa star rank of the chief of this unit, Mr.
There is none, Mr.
Nothing.
President.
As is
There
lang.
is none.
As is lang. So it's just
As is.
So ano yung pinakabago po na feature ng ating batas na ginawa nating mandatory?
Yung mandatory lang, Mr. President, to empower them para lalaki yung ating database.
Okay.
Kasi kulang na kulang ngayon.
Are we clear about the use naman of that? So through mandatory order, we will generate a database. Pero yung use naman itong database, are we very clear in the law? Ano naman ang use niya? Sino maka-access sa kanya?
Yeah, pero Mr. President, the access to and confidentiality of DNA profiles and information, the access to a communication or use of DNA profiles and any information in relation thereto stored in the PNP Forensic DNA database shall only be for the following purposes. Number one,
Maybe you know the section. Maybe you know the section.
Section 7, Mr. President.
7. Oh, sige.
Administering the database. Number 2, comparing DNA profiles or information in the course of an investigation conducted by any law enforcement agency or during judicial and quasi-judicial proceedings. And number 3, making the information available to a person to whom the information relates. DNA profiles and all results of other information obtained in the DNA testing shall be confidential and covered by the provisions of Republic Act number 10173, otherwise known as the Data Privacy Act of 2012. Mr. President.
Ang PNP natin ngayon ay pwede ba tayong humingi naman ng DNA profiles sa other police forces, Mr. President? Foreign law enforcement agencies?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay, so baka by reciprocity, ganun ba? Will we allow foreign law enforcement agencies to access our PNP DNA database?
They don't have access to our data, Mr. President, but through the Interpol, if they want to request our cooperation, we can cooperate with our foreign counterparts, Mr. President.
What would be the form of the request, Mr. President? They will send a sample and then a profile and then tayo magsisearch sa DNA database natin?
Yeah, Mr. President, if I may read, cooperation with foreign law enforcement agency. The PNP may, upon request by a foreign law enforcement agency, compare a DNA profile received from the foreign law enforcement agency with the DNA profiles in the DNA database in order to determine whether such DNA profile is already contained in the DNA database and communicate any relevant information to the foreign law enforcement agency. So meaning, Mr. President, yung foreign counterpart natin, foreign law enforcement agency, sila ang magpapadala dito ng DNA profile, i-receive ng PNP, then i-match nila sa existing natin na database. And kung merong match man ito, Mr. President, they will be informed accordingly. The information will be shared to them. Kung kaninong, who is the owner, who is this person, kaninong profile itong nag-match sa ating database.
So, most likely that would be a Filipino citizen. So, will we now reveal the identity of the Filipino citizen to the foreign law enforcement agency?
Hindi kung sinabi niyo yung pangalan. Kasi, halimbawa yung namatay sa ibang
natin ang ating tao doon.
A minute suspension, Mr. President.
Minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Mr. President, ready to resume. So, yes. Well, going back to the question of the good minority leader, Mr. President, if you have an existing treaty with a foreign, like with a foreign entity like the Interpol, we are obliged to cooperate with the Interpol through sharing of information only. So kung magpadala sila dito ng profile, then nakita natin dito sa ating database na mayroong kamats na profile dito, we're going to share with them the names of the profile. Anyway, they are the ones who will be who has jurisdiction of the case in their own territory. So ours is only cooperation, giving them the information through information sharing.
Tsaka baka bumagsak din sa meron din tayo mga mutual legal assistance treaties baka
Pwede, Mr. President.
ito, ano? So
Yeah.
that would be the legal basis of our cooperation. But Mr. President, doon sa mga law enforcement agencies, members, AFP, to be required to submit DNA samples, okay na, pwede natin sabihin part of public service yun
Yes.
Requirement ng duty mo yun. So gagawin talaga nila. But can we really force the submission of DNA samples by the others, yung mga those just facing criminal cases na hindi naman din convicted? Yung iba, sabi nyo, legally detained. I mean, kukunan ka na kaagad ng legally. Pag sinabing legally detained is, let's say, pwedeng yung tao, wala namang access na to a lawyer, hindi na umangal. So legally detained na yun. Hindi na na-review yung legality of the detention. So pwedeng napagtripan lang ng ating law enforcer at na dinetain, dinala sa police station at dinetain. Can we really require them to submit DNA without violating their rights under the Bill of Rights, Mr. President? Tandaan natin na hindi lahat ng examination ng katawan ng tao ay pwedeng gawin na Mr. President.
Mr. President, this is done only through bakal swab, Mr. President. Simple. Like if you are a suspect of drunk driving, you will open your mouth, then breath analyzer will be put inside your mouth. So just the same, Mr. President. Open your mouth, we will make a bakal swab inside your mouth.
And then because if the person says why, what is the answer? Why should I give you a sample of my saliva, Mr. President?
Because you have committed a crime.
Suspected of having committed a crime.
Committing a crime. Like for example,
If the person is innocent, then their profile can be deleted.
Mr. President, if later on the case against the suspects are dropped, then they can request for the removal of their database from the database of the PNP forensics group.
Nabaliktad po yung ating nabaliktad yung presumption of innocence natin.
Baliktad.
Yes, parang
Okay.
itratong guilty, kunin ng DNA, proven innocent, alisin, mag-request pa siya. Pag di siya mag-request, maiwan pa, Mr. President. So biglang are there other jurisdictions which have extensive DNA database?
Here in the Philippines,
Other jurisdictions?
almost like the United States.
Okay, United
Yeah.
States.
Canada,
Siguro sa United States, ang
Singapore.
approach nila on a per state basis.
Yes,
siguro?
Mr.
Per
President.
state, okay.
Oh,
So how
per
does-
state, but
Is it per state?
they also have federal jurisdiction. The FBI,
Okay.
they have their own
Okay.
database.
How did they develop their massive DNA database? Is it because they forced people to submit DNA samples?
All arrestees, all convicts.
The same, Mr. President, we just copied their. This is the U.S. model, Mr. President. All convicts, all arrestees, small times, big crimes, whenever they are in the custody of the police, it's like a matter of procedure. They will be buccal swab will be conducted upon their person.
If you're suspected of a crime, you can.
Even though they are only suspect of committing a crime.
Okay, so all those detained sila in the United States, all those detained, those suspected of drunk driving, but then of course successfully arguing with the police that they are not over the alcohol limit. Are they still required to submit DNA?
No, misdemeanors are not. We don't have.
If drunk driving in the United States is considered a misdemeanor only, Mr. President, then they are not required. Misdemeanor offenses are not required.
So tayo, sa atin,
Suspected of
sa atin
committing...
convicted by final judgment for violation of any criminal law. So must this law be an RPC or special law or kasama ang violation ng ordinance dito?
So, yeah. Maybe penal laws, Mr. President.
So not a penal ordinance. Kasi pwede rin na penal ordinance.
Maybe not, Mr. President. We will.
Yes, we can.
We will make the proper.
If the jurisdiction that we are studying made the distinction between misdemeanor and ano, so I'm just following up. If we also are conscious of that distinction, Mr. President.
Maybe, Mr. President, violations of the revised penal code and special laws.
Unfortunately, kung na-detain din yung nag-violate ng ordinance, pasok siya sa another ground. Persons legally detained under the law. Forced din siya magbigay ng swab, ng sample. So, siguro, Mr. President, let's look for a good model kasi there must be a reason why this American jurisdiction distinguish between a misdemeanor and the rest of the criminal act violations. And then, sabi ng ating sponsor po, part na siya ng parang protocol nila once detained, swab kagad, gano'n ba? I never heard of that, pero if that's what our resource person tells us, we'll just double check it, Mr. President. Sige, so we just want to be fair, Mr. President, na hindi naman tayo parang kaliwat kanan na nagsaswab na bakit magtatanong ngayon yung ating kababayan, bakit? Meron kang binayolate na batas o di isaswab na kita. I mean, so we have to be very, very clear kasi mandatory ito eh. Kung voluntary, okay lang. I think even UP and some other entities, you can submit your DNA voluntarily.
Yes.
Okay lang, walang problema doon. We are just looking at the mandatory nature of this bill, Mr. President. Doon tayo magbabantay kasi when we mandate yung Bill of Rights, baka may ma-violate po tayo ron.
We will try to study the U.S. model and the Singapore model, Mr. President.
There is a Singapore model?
Yeah, there's also Singapore model. And if it will not contradict to the provisions of our Constitution, then maybe we can adapt it.
Because I think this involves the right of the people to be secure in their persons.
Yes,
kasi
Mr. President.
Makakagulat po, open your mouth. Sabi ng law enforcement, open your mouth.
Yeah, that's what is being done, Mr. President, for drunk driving. You have to be subjected to breath analyzer.
Yes. But then if you pass it, there's no collection of DNA sample.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, di ba?
That's correct.
I mean, so ibig sabihin nun mas intrusive yung invasive collection of DNA sample
because it can be deposited in the database.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
correct,
Yun na nga, tatanggalin nga natin yung stigma rin na when you're in that database, dapat hindi natin sabihin because you're a criminal or you were suspected of being a criminal. Alisin natin yung stigma na yun.
That is why all PNP personnel and
Yes,
all military personnel are included.
Yun naman po nag-cure doon kasi
Yes.
inano natin all AFP and all law enforcement agencies. Sige po, Mr. President. So we just took advantage of the presence of our resource persons and then we any other budgetary implication kung maging batas ito?
It was not stated in the...
Kasi ano ba? Because maging law, andyan na yung equipment, hardware, software, but mayroon ba itong mga MOOE, mga supplies, ano bang ano nito?
supplies maybe, Mr. President, because we are requiring the whole, all the members of the PNP and the AAP.
Any
So,
estimate, magkano ang ating
May estimate,
budgetary, ano?
We have the annual.
Oo nga eh. Pero,
This is the annual budgetary requirement, Mr. President. It's 336 million, Mr. President, for the 3 DNA laboratories.
336 million a year
A year.
ang ating
A year.
idadagdag because of this. For the so-called consumables siguro, plus of course, the, ano pa, of course, the PNP and the AFP and the other law enforcement agencies will have, especially this is a PNP pala database, no? So it's the PNP will have to have additional budget for the systematic collection of the samples from those required to give samples.
Correct, Mr. President.
So beyond the 300 plus million yun. Kasi iikot si Timpat sa Tawi-Tawi, Sulu, Basilan, may mga police forces po ron eh. Iikot sila sa buong Mindanao, buong Visayas. Kukunin.
Yes, Mr. President. But overall,
That's beyond the 300 million, Mr. President. Kasi I think consumables lang yun.
kasama na din.
Ano? Di ba maganda rin naman yun para deterrent din sa kanila, hindi sila mag-commit ng crime. Hindi nasa DNA database ako. So, yun lang po, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
It will be more than the 336 million?
Correct, Mr. President. 336 million, Mr. President.
But kaya nga, is that yung 336, that's only the consumables? The
Consumables.
supplies. So, plus-
Every year, because it depends, this is dependent on the capacity of the 3 laboratories. We cannot process all the members of the PNP and AFP in 1 year. So in 1 year, ito lang talagang consumables na kayang to be expended by the 3 DNA laboratories, the 336. Maximum na yan, maximum operation na nila yan.
Sayang po sana yung ano, ilan bang members ng PNP, for example? 100...
210,000.
210,000. So, to gather the 210,000 samples, ilang taon? And to generate the DNA profiles.
Ilang taon?
Kaya ko naman tinanong kasi.
Around 3 years, Mr. President.
3 years. Okay.
3 years.
Kasi po, yun lang yung isang magandang feature talaga nito na, you know, sabi ng ating sponsor, crime prevention and solution. Sa solution is because may crime prevention deterrent.
Deterrent.
So, member ka ng law enforcement, adyan ka na, in 3 years, kompleto na po yun. Kahit na sinasabay ninyo yung pagkolekta sa AFP, kaya? Or, ano?
For PNP only, the estimate is around 3 years. So, for including the AFP, maybe can extend about up to 5 years.
Yun na nga, sana ang approach natin is tapusin ng isang ahensya.
Yes,
Para kumpleto, hindi yung nagtatagal lahat, incomplete lahat.
Priority natin, PNP, Mr. President.
Ako
Priority
kasi
natin.
isa ito sa magandang feature po na ako na-appreciate ko po personal na may deterrent effect ito, knowing
Yes.
that I am in a DNA database with 99.9999% accuracy. So, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to our sponsor, and congratulations for sponsoring this bill. At siguro during the break, one last look na lang tayo on some constitutional issues.
Yes, Mr.
We will
President.
already terminate our interpellation. Just in case kung meron lang kami ma-encounter, we will just move for its reopening. Pero pag hindi naman, tuloy-tuloy na po natin itong i-process. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
President.
Mr. President. And we can do that in the period of amendments, Mr. President, if you want to amend. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Boto. Thank you, Majority Leader.